When a young software developer, Emily, creates a groundbreaking logistics app, she believes her hard work will finally earn her the recognition she deserves. But her charismatic boss, Richard, steals her idea, claiming it as his own and reaping the rewards of her labor. Fueled by anger and betrayal, Emily begins a dangerous game of revenge, uncovering Richard's history of exploiting employees and his hidden crimes of embezzlement. As she meticulously builds her case, Emily becomes the underdog in a battle against a powerful corporate predator. But just as her plan comes together, an unexpected twist reveals a hidden enemy with their own agenda, someone with a shocking connection to the app's origins. In a web of lies, betrayal, and revenge, Emily must confront a startling truth: in the pursuit of justice, who's truly the villain? And will she lose herself in the fight for what's rightfully hers? I had always been the kind of person who believed in the system: work hard, follow the rules, and success would come eventually. My parents had drilled that mindset into me since I was a kid. And for most of my life, it seemed to work. I got good grades, landed scholarships, and eventually scored a coveted position as a software developer at Cardex Technologies, a promising mid-sized tech company that was supposed to reward creativity and ambition. At least, that's what their mission statement said. From day one, I worked harder than anyone else on my team. I stayed late, volunteered for extra projects, and was always the first to step up with ideas during brainstorming sessions. It wasn't about getting praise, I genuinely loved what I did. Building systems, solving problems, creating something out of nothing, it felt like magic to me. And when Richard Green, our department head, started noticing my contributions, I thought I was finally on the right track. Richard was everything you'd expect from a charismatic leader. He was sharp, charming, and always seemed to know the right thing to say to motivate the team. He made you feel seen, like your hard work mattered. I'll admit, I looked up to him. I thought he was the kind of boss who had your back, the kind of person you could trust. I couldn't have been more wrong. The turning point came during one of our quarterly brainstorming sessions. The company was looking to expand its portfolio and wanted new ideas for tech products that could attract small businesses. As usual, I had been thinking about the problem for weeks. I'd noticed a recurring issue among small business owners: they struggled to streamline their logistics. Managing suppliers, inventory, and shipping was a nightmare, especially for companies without big budgets for specialized software. That's when the idea hit me. What if there was a platform, a single app, that could integrate all these processes into one seamless system? It could use AI to predict inventory needs, optimize shipping routes, and even suggest suppliers based on historical data. It would save small businesses time and money, and the potential market was massive. I pitched the concept during the meeting, my heart racing as I explained the details. The room was silent for a moment after I finished, and then Richard broke into a wide grin. "Emily, this is incredible," he said, his eyes lighting up. "This could be a game changer for the company." The rest of the team chimed in with their support, and I felt a rush of pride. Finally, all my hard work was paying off. Richard asked me to start developing a prototype immediately, and I dove into the project with everything I had. For the next few months, I barely saw daylight. I worked late nights, skipping meals and weekends, pouring my heart and soul into the app. And it worked. The prototype exceeded everyone's expectations. Richard couldn't stop singing my praises during team meetings. "Emily, you've really outdone yourself," he'd say, patting me on the back. "This is going to put us on the map." I believed him. I trusted him. The app launched 6 months later under the name Streamline. It was an instant success. Industry blogs called it the future of logistics for small businesses. Investors flocked to Cardex, eager to buy in. The company's stock price soared, and we even secured a multi-million-dollar deal with a Fortune 500 client. It was everything I'd dreamed of, and yet, something felt off. It started with the press release. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. I brushed it off at first, assuming it was an oversight. Then came the interviews. Richard was everywhere, on TV, in magazines, on podcasts, talking about his vision for Streamline. I kept waiting for him to mention me, to give me credit for the work I'd done, but it never happened. The final blow came during the company's annual meeting. Richard was on stage, accepting an award for Innovation of the Year. As the audience applauded, I felt a strange mix of anger and disbelief. My hands clenched into fists as I realized the truth: Richard had stolen my idea. I confronted him the next day in his office. The blinds were drawn, and the faint smell of his expensive cologne hung in the air. He was leaning back in his chair, scrolling through emails on his phone when I walked in. "Emily. What's up?" he said, flashing that easy smile of his. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Richard, why wasn't I given credit for Streamline? I developed the app. It was my idea." He set his phone down and looked at me, his expression shifting to one of carefully calculated concern. "Emily, I know how hard you worked on this, and I appreciate it. But you have to understand, Streamline is a company project. Anything you create while working here is technically company property. It's not personal, it's just policy." "Not personal?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "You stole my work and took all the credit. How is that not personal?" Richard sighed, as if I were a child who didn't understand the rules of the game. "Look, you're still young. You have a bright future ahead of you. Don't let something like this ruin your career. Keep your head down, and I promise, your time will come." I stared at him, my mind racing. He wasn't just dismissing me, he was daring me to challenge him, daring me to fight back. And that's when it hit me: Richard wasn't the mentor I'd thought he was. He was a predator, someone who thrived on exploiting people like me for his own gain. I walked out of his office that day feeling humiliated and powerless. But as the weeks passed, humiliation gave way to anger, and anger turned into something sharper, something colder. Richard thought he'd won, that I would slink away quietly and let him take what was mine. He was wrong. After the confrontation with Richard, I sank into a fog of disbelief and bitterness. I kept playing his smug words over in my head: "It's not personal, it's just policy." Like it was supposed to erase the betrayal I felt. Like it was normal for someone to steal your blood, sweat, and tears and wear them like a badge of honor. At first, I thought about quitting. What was the point of staying in a place where my hard work would never be recognized? But something stopped me. The thought of walking away without a fight, of letting him get away with it, gnawed at me. I didn't want to leave. I wanted justice. It started with curiosity, innocent, at first. I began digging into the company's internal files during after hours, looking for anything that could help me understand how this happened. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe proof that Richard had knowingly violated company policy, or some kind of document trail showing that I was the rightful creator of Streamline. I didn't know. But I wasn't going to stop until I found something. What I discovered, though, was far worse than I'd expected. I wasn't Richard's first victim. In the course of my research, I came across old project files from employees who had come and gone over the years. I started noticing a pattern: bold, innovative ideas credited to Richard, with no mention of the employees who'd worked on them. I found 3 other major projects, 2 apps and 1 software tool, that had been launched under Richard's leadership. When I cross-referenced the names of the employees involved, I realized they'd all left the company shortly after their projects went live. No farewell emails. No LinkedIn announcements about exciting new opportunities. Just abrupt departures. It didn't take a genius to figure out what had happened. Richard had been stealing ideas for years, pushing people out once they realized what he was doing. And no one had stopped him. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was bigger than that. Richard was a parasite, feeding off the creativity and hard work of others, and I was determined to expose him. But I couldn't do it without proof. My next step was to dig into Streamline itself. I needed to prove beyond a doubt that I was the app's original creator. Thankfully, I'd been meticulous during development. I had old notebooks full of sketches, equations, and brainstorming ideas. I'd also backed up my work on a private server during the early stages, complete with timestamps. If anyone questioned my claim, I had an airtight case. But there was still one problem: none of that would matter unless I had leverage. I knew how these things worked. A public accusation without enough weight behind it could backfire spectacularly, especially against someone as well-connected as Richard. If I wanted to bring him down, I needed more than just proof of my authorship. I needed something so damaging that no one could sweep it under the rug. That's when I shifted my focus. I wasn't just going after Streamline anymore. I was going after Richard. I started small, combing through his emails, company expense reports, and project memos. It was slow, tedious work, but I was patient. After weeks of digging, I finally hit pay dirt. In the company's expense logs, I found discrepancies that didn't add up. Richard had been filing reimbursements for business expenses that looked suspiciously personal: 5-star hotel stays, luxury dinners, and even a yacht rental during what was supposed to be a team-building retreat. At first, I thought it was just the usual corporate greed, pocketing a little extra from the budget to fund his extravagant lifestyle. But as I dug deeper, I realized it was much worse. Richard wasn't just abusing the company's expense policy. He was skimming money from investor funds. Buried in the financial reports, I found transfers to a private offshore account. The amounts were small enough to fly under the radar: $10,000 here, $15,000 there, but over time, they added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. He'd been siphoning money out of the company for years, hiding it in plain sight under fake project expenses. My heart raced as I stared at the numbers on the screen. This was it. The leverage I needed. If the board of directors found out about this, Richard would be finished. The only question was how to use it. I knew I couldn't go to HR or management directly. Richard had too much influence, and if he caught wind of what I was doing, he'd find a way to bury me. Instead, I decided to take a more covert approach. First, I compiled all the evidence into a neat, detailed dossier. Bank statements, email exchanges, forged invoices, it was all there, organized and impossible to refute. Then I reached out to an anonymous source, a journalist at a prominent tech publication who had a reputation for exposing corporate corruption. I'd followed their work for years, and I knew they had a knack for turning stories like mine into headline news. When I sent them the dossier, I included a brief explanation of what had happened to me and the others Richard had exploited. Within hours, I got a response. The journalist was intrigued. They wanted more information, including an exclusive interview with me. I hesitated. Going public was risky. If the story got out before I was ready, it could ruin everything. But then I thought about all the people Richard had trampled on over the years. If I stayed silent, he would keep doing it, and no one would ever hold him accountable. I agreed to the interview. While the journalist worked on their exposé, I turned my attention back to the company. My ultimate goal wasn't just to destroy Richard, it was to reclaim what was mine. To do that, I needed to ensure that the app's true origins were undeniable. I started uploading my original work to a public repository. Every line of code, every sketch, every note, everything I'd done before Richard got his hands on it. The platform I used was a well-known hub for developers, with strict timestamping protocols that would make it impossible for anyone to dispute the authenticity of my files. Once the upload was complete, I sent the link to a few trusted colleagues in the industry, along with a carefully worded message explaining the situation. I didn't go into too much detail, just enough to plant the seed of doubt about Richard's claims. Finally, I filed a formal complaint with the company's board of directors, attaching my proof of authorship for Streamline. I didn't mention the financial misconduct yet, I wanted to keep that card close to my chest for now. But I made it clear that I wouldn't go down quietly. Then, I waited. I knew it was only a matter of time before the storm hit. The storm didn't take long to arrive. 3 days after I filed the complaint with the board, I was called into a meeting. Not just any meeting, a closed-door session with the company's legal counsel, 2 board members, and, of course, Richard. When I walked into the conference room, he was already there, leaning back in his chair with that trademark smirk, radiating an air of invincibility. "Emily," he said smoothly, gesturing to an empty seat. "Glad you could join us." I ignored him and sat down, clutching my folder of evidence like a lifeline. The company's legal counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda, cleared her throat. "Emily, we've reviewed your complaint regarding the Streamline project. Before we proceed further, we'd like to hear your side of the story directly." This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for. I took a deep breath and laid it all out. I explained how I had conceptualized Streamline, how I had worked tirelessly to develop it, and how Richard had systematically erased my contributions. I showed them my personal notes, the timestamps from my private server, and the early drafts of the app's code, all of which predated the company's involvement. Richard sat there silently, his face a carefully neutral mask. But I could see the faint twitch in his jaw, the subtle clenching of his fists beneath the table. He was nervous, even if he wouldn't show it. When I finished, Linda turned to Richard. "Do you have anything to say in response?" Richard's confidence seemed to return as he leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "First of all, I'd like to commend Emily for her passion and dedication to this company. She's a valuable member of our team, and I respect the hard work she's done." He paused, giving the room a well-practiced smile. "However, as I've explained before, anything developed under company resources is legally the property of Cardex Technologies. While Emily's contributions were certainly important, the project was a team effort, and the final product was created under my guidance." He turned to me, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. "Emily, I never intended for you to feel unrecognized. I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding." I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my expression calm. "A misunderstanding?" I said, my voice steady. "The only misunderstanding here is that you think you can take credit for someone else's work and get away with it." The room fell silent. Linda looked between us, her expression unreadable. Then one of the board members, a gray-haired man with a stern demeanor, spoke up. "Richard, the evidence Emily has provided raises serious questions. We'll need to conduct a thorough review before drawing any conclusions." Richard's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I welcome any investigation. I have nothing to hide." I almost laughed. Nothing to hide. He had plenty to hide, and soon, everyone was going to know it. While the company began its internal investigation, the journalist I'd contacted published their exposé. The article hit the tech world like a thunderclap. The headline alone was enough to grab attention: "Betrayed by the Boss, the true story behind Cardex Technologies' Golden App." The piece detailed everything: my creation of Streamline, Richard's history of stealing ideas, and even the suspicious departures of past employees. It painted Richard as a manipulative opportunist and shone a spotlight on the toxic culture he had cultivated within the company. But the real bombshell came at the end of the article, where the journalist hinted at financial misconduct within Cardex. I hadn't given them all the details, I wanted to save that for later, but I'd provided just enough to raise eyebrows. The fallout was immediate. Social media erupted with outrage, and the hashtags #JusticeForEmily and #StreamlineScandal started trending within hours. Tech forums and industry blogs picked up the story, and employees at other companies began sharing their own horror stories about bosses like Richard. Within a day, Cardex's PR team was in full damage control mode. They issued a vague statement about conducting an internal review and reaffirming their commitment to integrity and innovation. But the damage was done. As for Richard, his confidence began to crack. He tried to play the victim, claiming the article was full of baseless accusations, but no one was buying it. The board couldn't ignore the public outcry, and they accelerated their investigation into Streamline. I thought things couldn't get any better, but then I got a call from the journalist. "Emily, you're not going to believe this," they said, excitement crackling through the phone. "One of Richard's former employees just reached out to me. They've been following the story and want to share their experience." Within days, 3 former employees came forward, each with similar stories of exploitation and betrayal. One of them had even kept emails showing that Richard had explicitly instructed them to hand over their project files before he presented their work as his own. The journalist published a follow-up article featuring their accounts, and this time, it wasn't just the tech community paying attention. Mainstream media outlets picked up the story, and soon, Cardex Technologies became a household name, for all the wrong reasons. The board had no choice but to put Richard on administrative leave while the investigations continued. Watching him pack up his office was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. But I wasn't done yet. With Richard temporarily out of the picture, I shifted my focus back to the financial misconduct. I knew it was my trump card, the final blow that would ensure he could never worm his way back into power. I submitted the evidence of his embezzlement to the board anonymously, knowing they would have no choice but to act. This wasn't just a matter of ethics, it was criminal. The board's reaction was swift. Within a week, they held an emergency meeting to discuss the findings. I wasn't privy to what went on behind closed doors, but I didn't need to be. The outcome was obvious when the company issued a statement announcing Richard's immediate termination and pledging full cooperation with law enforcement. The news hit like a second earthquake. Investors pulled out, stock prices plummeted, and clients began canceling contracts. Cardex was in freefall, and Richard's name was forever tainted. But the best part? The app I'd created, Streamline, was now synonymous with the scandal. The board, desperate to salvage what they could, offered to publicly acknowledge me as the app's original creator in exchange for a settlement agreement. I didn't say yes right away. I made them sweat. When I finally agreed, the terms were better than I could have imagined. Not only did they publicly credit me as the creator of Streamline, but they also paid me a 7-figure settlement for the rights to continue using the app. The press coverage painted me as the underdog who had triumphed against corporate greed, and I received hundreds of messages from people thanking me for standing up for what was right. As for Richard, his downfall was complete. He was facing criminal charges for embezzlement, his reputation was ruined, and his career was over. Last I heard, he was living off the scraps of what little he'd managed to hide, trying to rebuild his life far away from the industry he'd once dominated. I should have felt sorry for him, but I didn't. He'd made his bed. Now he had to lie in it. In the aftermath of Richard's downfall, life should have felt perfect. I had won, there was no doubt about that. I was finally recognized as the creator of Streamline, I'd received a life-changing settlement, and Richard's name was in tatters. Every time I saw his face on the news, framed by words like embezzlement and disgrace, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Justice had been served. Or so I thought. It started with a phone call. "Emily Davis?" a man's voice asked. It was calm but professional, like someone used to delivering bad news. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Detective Jared Myers with the Financial Crimes Unit. I'm investigating the Cardex Technologies case, specifically the embezzlement tied to Richard Green." My heart skipped a beat. "Yes, I'm aware of the case. What does this have to do with me?" "Well," he said, pausing slightly, "your name has come up in connection to certain funds related to the Streamline project. I was hoping you could come down to the station to answer a few questions." My stomach dropped. "I don't understand," I stammered. "What funds?" "I had nothing to do with the embezzlement." "I'm sure you didn't," he replied evenly. But we've uncovered some irregularities in the financial records, transfers made to an account linked to your name. It would be in your best interest to clear this up. I hung up the phone, my mind spinning. Transfers. Linked to me. It had to be a mistake. Or maybe Richard was trying to pull one last desperate move to save himself. Either way, I wasn't about to let this derail my life. At the police station, Detective Myers slid a folder across the table. Inside were pages of bank records showing a series of wire transfers totaling over $200,000, transfers made to an offshore account under my name. This isn't mine, I said, my voice trembling as I stared at the documents. I don't even have an offshore account. Myers raised an eyebrow. The account was opened 6 months before the Streamline launch. The timing coincides with the early stages of development. And here's the kicker, the account holder's information matches your social security number and personal details. Panic surged through me. Someone had stolen my identity. But who? And why? Detective, you have to believe me. I didn't do this. Richard must have set this up to frame me. He's been stealing from the company for years. You've seen the evidence. Myers frowned, tapping a pen against the desk. We considered that possibility. But this account isn't tied to Richard. We traced its creation back to a third party, a woman named Claire Reynolds. The name hit me like a freight train. Claire Reynolds had been one of the developers I'd found during my initial digging, a former Cardex employee whose project had been stolen by Richard. She was one of the whistleblowers who'd come forward during the exposé. Claire. I said, disbelief thick in my voice. That doesn't make any sense. She hated Richard. Why would she try to frame me? Myers leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. That's what we're trying to figure out. Claire disappeared 3 weeks ago, right after the exposé went viral. But before she vanished, she sent an anonymous email to the SEC, claiming that you and Richard were working together to embezzle funds from Cardex. What? My voice cracked. That's insane. I barely even knew her. But the detective wasn't done. We also found correspondence between Claire and a third party, a shell company that received substantial payouts during the Streamline development phase. These payouts were disguised as vendor contracts, and guess what? The contracts were signed by you. My blood turned to ice. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to implicate me, using my name, my information, even forging my signature. But the deeper I thought about it, the more a chilling realization dawned on me, this wasn't Richard's doing. He was too arrogant, too self-centered to concoct something this elaborate. No, this was someone else. Someone smarter. I went home that night, shaken but determined to figure out the truth. I combed through my files, emails, and records, looking for anything that might connect Claire to whoever was behind this. As I dug deeper, I noticed something I'd overlooked before, an email Claire had sent me months ago, shortly after the app launched. At the time, it seemed innocent enough. Congrats on Streamline. I wish things had worked out differently for me at Cardex, but I'm glad someone like you is getting recognition. Let's grab coffee sometime, there's a lot we could talk about. I'd never replied. At the time, I was too focused on fighting Richard to pay much attention to her. But now, rereading the message, I noticed something strange. The email had been sent from a personal address, not her company account. And the signature included a phrase I hadn't thought much of before, looking forward to collaborating again someday. Collaborating? Again. A cold chill ran down my spine. Claire had never worked directly with me, not even during her time at Cardex. So what collaboration was she talking about? The answer came 2 days later, in the form of a visit from Linda, the company's legal counsel. Emily, she said as she stepped into my apartment, her face grave. We need to talk. What now? I asked, my nerves already frayed. Linda sighed, pulling out a thick folder. The board has been conducting a deeper investigation into Streamline. And we've uncovered something troubling. She opened the folder and slid a document across the table. My eyes widened as I read the title, Streamline Development Proposal. The document was dated 6 months before I pitched the app, and it contained nearly identical ideas, down to the AI-driven logistics features and predictive analytics. But the kicker? The author wasn't me. It was Claire Reynolds. This is fake, I stammered, my heart pounding. She didn't come up with Streamline. I did. Linda shook her head. We thought so too, until we found emails between Claire and Richard discussing the project. It seems they were working on it together long before you joined the team. Richard must have realized Claire wouldn't keep quiet, so he cut her out and let you unknowingly take her place. The room spun as the pieces fell into place. Claire had been the original creator of Streamline, but Richard had stolen her work, just like he tried to steal mine. Only this time, he'd used me as a pawn to cover his tracks. And Claire? She hadn't disappeared out of fear. She'd gone underground to take revenge, not just on Richard, but on me, the unwitting accomplice who'd benefited from her stolen work. The revelation sent shockwaves through the company and the media. The scandal grew even bigger, and soon, no one could tell who the real villain was anymore. Was it Richard, the thief who'd orchestrated everything? Claire, the ghost who'd turned revenge into a fine art? Or me, the accidental face of a project built on lies? In the end, it didn't matter. The truth was too messy, too convoluted for anyone to untangle. Cardex collapsed under the weight of the scandal, and I walked away from the industry altogether, haunted by questions I could never answer. Had I been a victim, or had I unknowingly played a role in someone else's destruction? I'll never know for sure. But every so often, I wonder where Claire is now. And if she's somewhere out there, watching, waiting for the next piece of her plan to fall into place.